I just wanted to note this on the Kia Boys. In a video, I put a link to it, and it's like it's like ninja like. They weren't ninja themed, but it's like ninja themed. But also, no, I don't know if she was chopped up or just stuffed in a wall. Around the time the girl was reportedly stuffed in a wall at Yale College in New Haven, right next to the FBI note. There was also someone I noted with a ninja uniform. There's a Fred Grisey also involved with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, also with a bunch of people next to Hartford Hospital through time, a bunch of ways, intercities involved with putting predicate X effects and roles with being and having been used remotely with a whole bunch of other, including the family members of overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and the three branches of government and the intelligence tied to them, kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts and federal predicate acts at the same time as people involved with all kinds of drugs and medicines crimes too, with the state judicial branch offices and the state corrections offices involved with Hartford Hospital, also with these names, putting fake transcripts on a mass scale. Oh, hell. They have me, Channel 3 News, WFSB, is involved with the same names. They put me in fake conversations with themselves and others. Some Mendez police pretended I had a conversation with them at the Wethersfield police station, as ones involved with the FBI in a number of ways, too. And with their, and I don't even had a class with either of those Mendez brothers. In other words, never even saw them around. They try to make a couple exceptions and have other people speak about their names. And then if you speak about that, it makes you looks like you know them, who are also people recorded involved with falsified police reports, identity theft, fraud, slander, and fake things in databases behind people's backs. And all exception nature too. They're trying to pretend that it's not fake uses of exceptions they're planting. All sides of criminal and civil cases. The court's names, their family members, the lawyers, the same thing, the conjunctions to them, their campuses' names, and the news and names next to body dumping spots and criminalized private ones, even when they're not in those cases, they're putting the same sequence of self-value. The court next to the World Trade Center attack, right before the attack, self-value rules with sequence shifting, changing the date on things. Proven. Names on both sides of that case at the same time. Involved with predicate acts against me, too. They're just people just using people's fakes for them, including by former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, increasingly tied to an officer, Hunter, involved with Hartford courts in the British Superior Court and their families in intimate ties, foreign and domestic military, with an officer, Hunter, involved with sequence shifts and predicate acts before and after the World Trade Center attack. I saw him at Central Connecticut State University one time. Never had a word of conversation with him. He's increasingly involved with people on Park Street too, with Alina's Pizza, involved with Daryl Sullivan, involved with more courts, involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids, and more with a principal upskirt nature, and more teachers at the school involved with WT&H, also right next to the FBI note in New Haven. Kia Boys. There's a Fred Grisey. And with the military. These are people involved also with the military. I'm like, we have to get them on paper, one name and sequence, like all conjunctive to Valley Crest Street and Wethersfield are people with the name Schedule. I never had a word of conversation with them. They're neighbors. I don't know their names. And one's with the name Tomorrow. I'm involved with some sexual and medical offenders of kids and leaders of them first forced years apart. The same names have rules of names next to body dumping spots of different reported killers, but with the names next to those spots involved with them with planting evidences. Roles with all kinds of investigators all use remotely criminally pointable tactically delusions raw. We can observe how whole careers are also recorded through how they are kept criminally pointable tactically delusions raw. Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, increasingly is recorded roles with predicate acts on my street with people from other countries at the same exact time. These are people involved with differences, racketeering, worse than war crimes. Some black KKK theme, Latino theme, Confederate flag theme, The North and South, James Madison forced them to have to fight. James Madison didn't even have free speech when he was a president. He's the only one we know was our founder, besides Native Americans A through Z. The only part of the Native Americans, coupled with James Madison and with the colonists that were behind him and his plan with the Native Americans. Nature itself shows us they enabled that leverage to counter extort at key locations inside of more than 13 colonies, and slavery and roles with it had been sustained. For example, and against the breaching method against Native Americans, everyone's education was replaced, and roles with science's voicings tactical terror from nature's communications. That's increasingly for a method that is not a country's A through Z, but new countries, a new location. Countries A through Z can only be operated by names A through Z, locations, areas, and states, rather, A through Z, or as A through Z names too, but as locations, areas, and states. You see their solution even with guns. They're all with the nuclear war, and we're the experts on it, so we're going to speak in the back room. That's important. But what about put the part in up front, where we all know that you guys have to speak in the back room because you have some kind of sick things with trying to keep these things cool. The whole world blows up just to make peaceful energy generation in your jobs roles. You guys have changed what our founders communicated about the jobs, about the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, witch trials placed next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Then and now, still as tools, our founding locations, with voicings and with sense and sensibilities by them, communicated tactical terror them with James Madison and our founders behind him, plural, communicated for us to understand about James Madison and the founders behind him, how they counter-extorted George Washington. And George Washington agreed to help them and to use that plan and to counter-extort the rest of the people at key locations. And they had to leave slavery entrenched because they were fact-treating nature, tortured, extorted, and fact-treating nature enslaved, therefore physically enslaved themselves to an extent. Our founders themselves. And they are distinct from our presidents, who were all extorted by the breaching method, tortured by the breaching method, fact-treating nature, enslaved by the breaching method. No one even allows anyone to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, as he asked us to be honest about his extortion. It would have brought up James Madison's plan. Or it would have brought up people that don't know that, dishonestly pretending they don't, discrediting things just because of where something's written, for example. It's because campus is A through Z. It's important to know the South-by rules because it uses that, which is simultaneously collusion / with all kinds of organized crimes without even, well, we don't want that. I know that it has been, no one wanted collusions to have Black people's lives left out from the subjects like slavery at their campuses, but we had it left out, didn't we? That's why we never hear it. This teaches about difference. We have the same color eyes. We have different color eyes at the same time. We have there are exceptions, exception nature. And there are other species bodies that have two eyes. Nature's identity is showing us, to an extent, its body that is not us nor them, but it's all things anyway, and is beyond this too at the same time, distinctly from how it is not beyond it. Has an identity of relationship to itself, where and how it is beyond us, that is distinct from the part that is not beyond us. And when I say not beyond us, I mean all space / existence that is tempered comes with an even fuller bindingness, order / hyperorder, simultaneous / hyper-simultaneous, perfect / hyper-perfect world. But see, even nature itself, in other words, I forgot what I entitled this video, people, but I don't want to make it too long anyway. Many pray vaccines. In other words, so oh yeah, the Kia boys, and they have people framed for like, in other words, they have like 10 years in prison for stealing automobiles. And now see in California, there's riots going on, and you'll see through years, through lifetimes, people speak about crimes they never addressed with witch trials. There's a witch trials place next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum in Old Wethersfield. And what they were supposed to have communicated about that place was why and how George Washington had to come there to counter-extort right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War. And America's founders wanted us to understand clearer than day. They didn't want the breaching method against the Native Americans. They didn't want it against the colonists. And they didn't want to leave slavery entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies, let alone rolls with it. And other natures of everyone hurting each other and themselves to an extent, and measured roles with that by internationally monitored conversations that were also themselves tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved. Other ways that are so many that they couldn't even discern through it, and still can't, because there's also a unity by that, like a unified. I mean, a breaching, a singular, hyper singular breaching method that is not countries A through Z, and has nature increasingly demonstrating it to people A through Z. But other things, others ourselves, are shown need to be blamed, like by people pretending they could speak for a practical reason, to use Immanuel Kant's phrase, but as it means for everyone. In other words, we have means to agreements. We all will long clear water, beautiful water, clean food, and things. If we could do things to get that better than free. We don't want to have it halfway and not even good for us, hurting ourselves and paying for it and delaying or paying constantly. No, when we can just go like that together, use our might, let alone the whole species body, moving and checking together, because there is a difference between criminal and citizen's natures of positive and positive. There's a difference between truths used for lies, truths used to screen lies, truths used to put a lie between you. In other words, to keep equality of fact should be nature on a mass scale. That's one of the reasons no individual has been afforded their rights. They're only allowed to sue for themselves or to have the forced, mandated law for ourselves respected regarding Black people's rights of eyes. All rise. In other words, our founders left us to communicate about how that breaching method, to understand clearer than a day, a breaching method reassigned what nature communicates with this, when nature is not criminal insidiousness. And nature has it that way to show us that. Nature, if we're using its system or not. This breaching method forced countries A through Z, operated by locations, areas, of states, as a certain type of victim / hyper victim only capable of blaming other things, others ourselves, for things that it caused and keeps against each individual difference, each group difference, and each simultaneous difference, and its appreciation, where it is syntactical, like humanity voicings. All theater has criminal and ceaseless natures of positive treatments. Without this, Black peoples all see the whites of eyes. Attend. Campus Marcius needs its names again, and republics too. Whoa. Guys, see, a certain type of victim / hyper victim who has self-body rules still replacing with our founders' words replaced. Our founders' communications replaced. They declassified for us to have been inseparable from how and why no one had free speech, and why is because of the breaching method. A predicate acts with facts delivery system method, a criminal insidiousness nature delivery system method, Black peoples. I am not a lawyer. I recorded the F.B.I. You're not allowed to record. They recorded themselves, actually, rather. The FBI recorded themselves with digital crime acts and methods, and with wire crime acts and methods, also with whiting forensics, and with names at and next to the state corrections officers, also with syntax and family members involved with the World Trade Center attack, with the names at the location, next to the location, and the court next to it. The court itself and names on all sides of that are increasingly involved with people attaching media, fake and changed communications and sequence ships, fake ties, fake nature ties to other people, intercities, and worse. In other words, and with courts with switching and forging names, refusing to get on paper. This is how they kept and keep roles with natures and methods of organized crimes. That the only people that you ever heard speaking about other crimes. See, they can't speak on that properly relative to what witch trials are about, even if they were made up. Simultaneously, there were crazy laws against Native Americans, including when they helped them. And same thing against the colonists, including the laws that helped them. Criminal and insidious natures of positives and negatives. Hyper additional exclusion /S. With that which had slavery, no, non-distinctly too, but sickly distinctly, northern colonies, southern colonies. Before America's founders were born, there are homes that are built that are still standing. And they wanted to build better and safer then. But then they would have been too comfortable to think. They would have time thinking the way nature wants us to. See, we have been systems totalitarian from its own black pupils. We do not hunger and thirst. See, this proves forgiveness and non-forgiveness. We're supposed to pay attention to that simultaneously. And with exception nature. Would have brought up the breaching method. Would have brought up how there are things that we all know we would agree about like that. We all agree it's done and beautiful. In other words, all clean water. All of a sudden we have fish sources that are pure water above all the pollution and dripping down into the way it is now. Fake branches bow and fall, but they recede. Don't disbelieve. In other words, so kid boys, they're framing you. They're framing you. See how they also had like throughout the country, like crowd takeovers or whatever, street takeover. And it's like just an organized thing. These are, in other words, mass, the difference of our interbranch families or intelligence, and they never stop being criminally foreign influence, tactical illusions raw, using any means to pretend other, or sensing for the breaching method, and or that's why they're sensed. When like you, anyone who tried to use how we have black people as white survives, and it was a breaching method that hasn't been addressed the way that we know that it should have been and could have been. And simultaneously, we know that other was is pretended legitimate syntax for the science of American history. Black pupils. We move not without these. Next, we move to C's. We need the campus. And the Republic understood. Otherwise, we're deceived. In other words, no one knows how to. In other words, we're supposed to be led by the hyper invisible but still discernible, how it is distinct from the invisible but still discernible. For example, parts of speech. The parts of speech of English grammar subjects. They come with demonstration /S in the body, the hyper invisible but still discernible. How we can only appreciate subjects individually grouped and simultaneously to an extent. How we can discern that is right where we can discern how we can discern the other hyper extent, which is exception nature, where how it already is all subjects, and so could appreciate that. And so could we learn and know about things that we haven't even experienced yet this way? Hear many pray, but now also because we have been systems dactylotarian and denials of it. Otherwise, role sensing for that breaching method. So this is one of the things that we're not going to let go of. When people try to defend the sciences, pretend they had an ounce of integrity. Where how the people don't have an ounce of integrity because of them too. The differences of the guilt is being and has been played. Too long hear many pray. Vaccines. But says but shush. It sings, but not with words. But speaks as soul to soul. We are hyper-additional nature. So here, begin, behold, vaccines. Please, Connecticut's Channel 3 News attachment to fake conversations with themselves and with others. And the sources of WTNH. They have ones involved that live next to the corners of the streets, involved with various natures of pilots, including the Air Force itself, involved with recorded remote uses, individually grouped in together, their self-body roles with predicate acts with facts methods. Where and how that is being and having been used remotely too with the Weathersfield Police Department and other police departments with the same house /S personally and professionally involved with them with multiple courts and their family members in overt criminal enterprises and private ones at the same time. Prepare each heart, each soul, each mind. In other words, there are intelligence and people involved with medical corruption tied to Britney Spears. I'm not reporting any of their. I'm not even saying that anything is real, not real, or if it's even. In other words, I'm saying there are collusions with it. In other words, these are people putting fake things in transcripts, all kinds of criminally foreign influence crime methods and acts with different ways with signatures, and they measure and maintain identities that won't allow any one of those addressed honestly. They just change the fake people's words on a mass scale. And a breaching method did collusions with this. You have to pay attention to the self-valued ones. In other words, we had, since you were little kids, more and more criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw, identity theft, fraud, slanders, roles. Forced, tricked, and persuaded for good people to have against themselves, against yourselves, and against our human species body of individual bodies, while being against its way leading, that which is generating all group differences. And when it is not, when people are using differences, tactile from it's how nature's identity does, it shows us with negative value nature progression, acts, natures, and demonstrations, like the polluted ocean. We are only one species body, being used remotely, self-body, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw, and or sensing anyone who's not, by a breaching method, high performing. You guys can't make one subject treatment proper, let alone with the law. Black pupils, it is inseparable. In other words, Judge Napolitano, for example, I'm sure he would come to realize that all the standing judges and the retired ones, they missed a bunch of things. And now they're saying how we're missing a bunch of things. You guys are missing too. A lot of people who want to watch the news. Crazy things in the world. They're about to blow each other up. In other words, ourselves, A through Z, here into knee. There is one way that generates all others. Also, in a way that makes evolution's fruits gifts. It means out of nowhere come. Boxing is fun. Let's get begun, but start. Final mandate lose. Get me from the fake conversations with Channel 3 News, WFSB. So we don't have to go into more names. You guys make names stacked already. playing games, interstate, but refusing to identify themselves, police forms, involved with predators that are not even police. They might be police forms of intelligence, but they're involved in, with sequence shifts and with identity theft frauds from other areas. And so before they come back again, like a Phil Kalal, we have to have this taken care of. They have more credible rape threats and sexual and medical threats and demonstrations that they're putting fake things in databases against others' kids, and against their own, just relative to how they need to hide what they already been doing with this. So, in other words, a bunch of people involved with all ages and natures of campuses, also with the state corrections offices. I mean, with the state corrections office, yeah, but also the state education department and the differences of the guilt there, or with the names next to it and conjunctive to it, including mayors and all this. Forgiveness is so we can focus on the predicate acts. In other words, and for them too, because they're lying about what they perceive, or they're hiding details about that. Like, in other words, I never had one word of conversation. He didn't have one word conversation with anyone else in the class either, and Anthony Agnew. The only time I ever saw him on campus was inside of class, and there was a congressman, reportedly a Congressman Larson's relative with a different last name in the class, and he sat in like the front left, and Mike DeMaine sat in the front right near the teacher, and I sat in like the back near the door, a little bit in on the back left, and what's his face, Anthony Agnew sat there. Never had a word of conversation through entire high school. He's involved with a bunch of people and with his brothers, educators. I never had a class with his brother. Involved with also people with the name with my area. Involved with intelligence families. Involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Ones that offensively pretend to know me, I don't know them at all, and ones that years ago they pretended they know me. Then years ago, after it has high live progression. Their roles with corners of streets too are manifest. As ones involved with the child abusers, leaders of kids, first forest years apart. And I still haven't been responded to what I caught them doing. I caught them hiding that, so I caught them doing even more and more. They're recording, confessing, and demonstrating, confirming, and pretending others simultaneously, but they're not getting on paper one name in sequence. They should fear God to hide the plot. I rap a lot. Don't block me, YouTube, please. Joshua Julian is one of the ones on Facebook involved with the F.B.I. and Marines and Air Force, also with sexual and Navy, also with whiting forensics, and with the Wethersfield Police, involved with the families, also intercities and next to the news locations, like Hartford, Connecticut, Fox, Connecticut News. Increasingly, people with campuses recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's a Casper families that I never even was around. I never even see them around. They're putting fake things, fake ties to me in bad databases, and their roles with intelligence, foreign and domestic, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw, including with mayors and people tied to the spots next to the heart, next to the state capitol, and intercities associated with them. In other words, where's the Chet Casper live, and what's his sister's name, and what's his father's name, and let's get them on paper with the Wethersfield Police and the rest of the people's names they brought up. In other words, they're refusing to identify themselves. For years, they've been putting falsified police reports. They're also, in other words, and they faked conversation me being there too at the police station as a kid. They faked conversation I was there, but I didn't have one word of conversation with any officer, and they pretended other. Also, as demonstrating roles, putting arrays of falsified police report for the same falsified police report, they won't give me the actual police report. And has roles with a Phil Kalal, who's, I don't know where he lives, but he's involved in my area with more child abusers, leaders of kids years apart, and foreign and domestic intelligence, a bunch of people with judges, family members, and prosecutors involved, also with doctors, foreign and domestic, with sexual medical offenders of kids, of work, criminal enterprise, private ones, and while their tactically delusions drop black pupils. It is time. Prepare each soul, each mind. Who disbelieves? We need who disbelieves that. I'll show you how to sweep the streets of America and of the world. For boys, for girls, and how to clean the minds of the interbranch speaking on crimes, while their roles with predicate acts and facts, tactically delusions rot, pollution/S, with the hyperforeign at every location to keep things like criminal foreign influences blamed for hyper-criminal foreign influences, like that which is non-distinctly northern south and left entrenched. The way our founders communicated for us to understand it, though, is and has been replaced. All pace, some shadow box, some rest. Anyway, I will tell us best. Vaccines. I teach us things.